When humans first learned to use fire, everything changed. It marked the beginning of civilization. Fire gave us warmth, safety, and the power to cook food. But fire also had a darker side. It could destroy, cause harm, and even control lives. Fire is like two other big powers in human history: religion and politics. These two things can help people, but they can also be used to scare, control, and divide us. One man who talks about this is Hamed Abdel-Samad. He was born in Egypt and studied Islam very deeply. He says that Islam, when used for politics, has some of the same ideas as fascism, a kind of government that wants total control and doesn't allow freedom. Because of this idea, many people got angry at him. Some religious leaders even said he should be killed. But he didn't stop speaking or writing. He believes that we should always be allowed to think freely, even when it's difficult. So why does this matter to you or to anyone today? Because it's not just about religion or politics, it's about our future. Will we choose freedom, fairness, and truth, or will we allow fear, hate, and control to win? Where religion came from. Thousands of years ago, life was scary. People didn't understand things like sickness, storms, or death. So they started to believe in gods, powerful beings who controlled everything. Religion helped people feel safe. It gave them stories and rules. It helped explain the unknown. But over time, some religious leaders began to use religion to control people. They made strict rules. They told people what to believe and how to live. If you didn't follow their rules, you were called a sinner or even an enemy. The growth of politics. At the same time, humans were building larger cities, countries, and empires. To manage these big groups, people created politics, systems to decide who is in charge. These systems included democracy, communism, fascism, and others. Just like religion, politics is also about power. Who gets to lead? Who makes the rules? Who wins and who loses? In some places, religion and government stayed separate. In other places, they were combined. When religion becomes the law, people often lose their freedom. Women lose rights. People are afraid to speak. Different opinions are punished. That's why many people today say religion and politics should be separate. What makes Islam different? Islam is one of the world's major religions. From the beginning, it was not just a religion, it was also a political system. The Prophet Muhammad was a religious leader, but also a military and political leader. Islamic teachings divided people into two groups: Muslims, believers, non-Muslims called kafirs. In some texts, it says that people who don't follow Islam must either convert or be fought against. For example, one saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, found in Sahih Muslim Hadith 22 states, "I have been commanded to fight the people until they say, 'There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah.'" How this connects to fascism. Fascism is a kind of government that wants total control. It says everyone must obey one leader. It does not allow free speech. It hates other beliefs. Abdel-Samad says that Islamism, the political use of Islam, acts like this in many ways. Some Islamic leaders want one religion, one law, no criticism, no freedom for different ideas. This is not what all Muslims believe, but it is what some governments and groups do in the name of Islam. Speaking about this topic is not easy. It makes people angry. It can be dangerous. But some people, like Abdel-Samad, are still brave enough to speak. They say religion should not control governments. People should be free to think, speak, and believe. Human rights must come first. Not all religion is bad. Many people use religion to do good things. But when religion becomes a tool of power, it often leads to harm. The best way forward is to keep religion and politics separate. Let people believe, but don't force others. Teach peace, not fear. Respect freedom, not control. This video is based on the ideas of Hamed Abdel-Samad, an Egyptian-German author of Islamic Fascism. It is not an attack on Muslims. It is a message about freedom, truth, and power, and how we must protect those things for everyone. If this message made you think, share it, and remember, only when we ask hard questions can we find real answers, and only when we speak freely can we truly live freely. One day, while scrolling through Facebook, Abdel-Samad saw a photo that made him stop. It showed a bearded man holding a sign that said, "Behead those who compare Islam with terrorism." At first, Abdel-Samad felt sad. Then he smiled a little, because the message was so extreme, it almost proved his point. But months later, that smile disappeared. Now his own picture was being shared online, and under it the words read, "Wanted dead." On June 4, 2013, Abdel-Samad gave a lecture in Cairo. In it he said something bold, that a fascist mindset, strict, violent, and authoritarian, was already present in Islam from the beginning, long before the Muslim Brotherhood or other modern groups. He said Islam, in its early form, left little room for other beliefs. It demanded full obedience and aimed to conquer the world. That's why he used a new term, Islamofascism. His speech went viral online. Within days, it sparked a huge public argument. On TV, religious scholars showed up to defend Islam. They said Islam respected freedom and diversity. But then, the conversation turned dark. These same scholars began arguing over how Abdel-Samad should be killed. Some said he could be forgiven if he apologized and returned to Islam. Others said no apology was enough. He had to die. One respected professor told a chilling story. A woman had once insulted the Prophet Muhammad. Her owner killed her for it. When the Prophet heard about it, he said, her blood was spilled for a good reason. The professor used this story to prove it's okay to kill people who insult Islam or the Prophet. On another channel, a Salafi preacher threatened blood revenge for Abdel-Samad's words. Hamed couldn't help but notice. These men were so full of hate. They were proving everything he had just said. A life under threat. In Egypt, calling for someone's death is a crime. But nothing happened to the preachers. The president at the time, Mohamed Morsi, did nothing. In fact, he invited one of those extremists to a public event and hugged him on stage. As threats poured in, Abdel-Samad had to go into hiding. When he returned to Germany, he lived under police protection. Even there, danger followed him. Germany's foreign minister made a statement, the Egyptian government must protect this man. But Egypt did not. A message that grew louder. After Egypt's military removed Morsi, things changed slightly. Arrest warrants were issued for 2 of the men who threatened Abdel-Samad. Some TV stations were shut down. The newspapers now showed Abdel-Samad's attackers with the word "wanted" under their faces. But the threats never stopped. Even now, Hamed Abdel-Samad continues to receive death threats. He worries less about himself and more about his family, who live in fear, blamed for things they didn't do. But still, he refuses to stay silent. Ironically, the more people attack him, the more people read his books. He receives support from people all over Europe. Some offer him places to stay. One Egyptian man even wrote to him and said, "Thank you to the terrorists, they helped me discover you." Why this book exists in Islamic Fascism? Abdel-Samad wants to explain a difficult idea, that some of the same thinking behind fascism, total obedience, hate for others, violence to control, can also be found in political Islam. Not in all Muslims, not in peaceful believers, but in how Islam has been used for power. He expects this comparison will make people angry again, but that's exactly why he's writing it. He believes the reaction will show the truth, that many so-called moderate voices still refuse to allow real discussion about Islam and power. What this book covers. This book looks at many topics: the roots of Islam's political power, the Muslim Brotherhood's similarities to early fascist movements, the role of jihad, fear, and control, how Islam deals with sex, violence, and law, and how Islam is changing in modern Europe. But it starts with a bold idea, that fascism and political Islam share more than we think. Fascism is more than just a political system. It is like a belief, almost like a religion. In fascism, people are taught that their group is the best. They believe one strong leader will save them. This leader is seen as pure, powerful, and always right. Fascism teaches people to hate outsiders and punish anyone who thinks differently. It rejects kindness, diversity, and change. Instead, it values violence, war, and blind loyalty. According to Hamed Abdel-Samad, modern Islamism works in much the same way. Both Islamism and fascism began during times of shame and defeat. Fascism grew in Europe after World War I. Islamism grew after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, when many Muslims felt their power and pride were lost. Both movements promise to bring back glory, defeat their enemies, and build great empires. For example, Mussolini looked back to the Roman Empire for inspiration, while Islamists look back to the early Islamic Caliphate under the Prophet Muhammad. Both believe, we were once great and we will rule again. The problem with living in the past. The thinker Abdul-Wahab Medib says the biggest problem in the Muslim world is that it cannot accept its golden age is over. Muslim societies dream of the past and refuse to face the present. This gap between past glory and current weakness fuels anger toward the West, which is seen as the thief of their destiny. That anger turns into a kind of faith, a belief that the West must be punished and Islam must rule again. Abdel-Samad calls this sickness Islamic Fascism. Tradition as a weapon. Italian philosopher Umberto Eco described fascism as a system that worships tradition and fears change. Islamism is similar. The Quran is seen as perfect and complete, containing all human knowledge. Questioning it is not welcome. Thinking in modern ways is often seen as evil or blasphemous. In this view, being modern means being less faithful. Being a true believer means rejecting reason, freedom, and change. Both fascism and Islamism fight against the Enlightenment, individual rights, science, and modernity, women's freedom, foreigners, and new ideas. The enemy is everywhere. Eco also said that fascism creates enemies, real or imagined. Abdel-Samad shows how Islamism has done this since the beginning. It warns Muslims to fear Jews and Christians. It claims the world is always out to get Islam. It tells believers that the West wants to destroy them. In fascism, the goal is not just to survive, but to keep fighting forever. In Islamism, jihad is more than self-defense. It becomes a holy duty to fight until Islam rules. The message is clear. If you're not with us, you're against us. If you don't submit, you must die. Comparing fascism and Islamism. Let's look at how fascism and Islamism are similar and different. Fascism started after World War I, while Islamism grew after the Ottoman Empire fell. Both promised to bring back lost greatness. Fascists wanted to restore the Roman Empire's power, and Islamists want to rebuild the early Islamic Caliphate. Fascism is built on tradition, purity, and strict obedience, while Islamism is based on religious law and holy texts. Both hate modern ideas. Fascism hates modernity, and Islamism rejects anything seen as un-Islamic. Fascism spread during times of political chaos, and Islamism grew during the confusion of colonialism and its aftermath. Both created enemies to blame for problems. Fascists blame Jews and communists, while Islamists blame the West, Israel, and reformers. Fascism spread in Italy and Germany because of poverty and hopelessness, political chaos, and a hunger for strong leadership. Islamism spread in the Muslim world because elections were often rigged or canceled, military dictatorships left people no other choice, and Islamists promised order, identity, and justice. But whenever Islamists gained power, like in Iran, Sudan, Somalia, and Gaza, they created dictatorships and refused to give up control. Wherever they lost power, like in Egypt, Algeria, and Afghanistan, they turned to terrorism, a shared hatred of the modern world. Fascists, communists, and Islamists all hate cities, individual freedom, and modern life. The Nazis saw Berlin as immoral. Islamists say cities are full of sin. Communists saw cities as places of capitalist corruption. All three movements prefer obedient, closed societies. Citizens are watched all the time, dissent is crushed, and freedom is seen as a threat. In every case, they build societies that feel like open-air prisons. The eternal war, Islamists versus everyone. Islamists see three kinds of enemies. First, the West, distant and powerful. Second, Israel, near and hated. Third, their own people, secular thinkers, reformers, and politicians. Anyone who challenges Islamic power is an enemy. Foreign attackers are outsiders, while internal challengers are traitors or heretics. This is why wherever Islamists rule, they bring violence, like in Iran, Sudan, Somalia, and Gaza. And when pushed out, they turn to terror, in Algeria, Libya, Mali, and Syria. Why they still win support. Even though they bring chaos, Islamists still offer hope. Why? Because most Muslim societies feel humiliated by the West. They are led by corrupt dictators, lack real democratic choices, and want something pure and strong. This makes people turn to Islamists, not out of love but out of desperation. Layers of dictatorship. Abdel-Samad compares the Muslim world to an onion. The first layer is family dictatorships like Mubarak or Gaddafi. The second is military power. Then come religious authorities. At the center is patriarchy, men controlling families and society. During the Arab Spring, young people peeled back some layers. But the deepest layer, religious power, remains. Will they ever reach the core? Or will they stay trapped in a system that only looks powerful, but is actually built on fear? Final thoughts on Chapter 1. Abdel-Samad says this isn't a clash between Islam and the West. It's a civil war inside the Islamic world itself. A war between modernity and tradition, between control and freedom, between fear and the courage to think differently. Who is the Muslim Brotherhood? The Muslim Brotherhood is one of the most powerful Islamist groups in the Middle East. It started in 1928 in Egypt, founded by Hassan al-Banna. At first, it was a small group focused on Islamic values and social change, but over time it grew into a big political force with supporters all over the Arab world and even in Western countries. On the surface, the Brotherhood talks about things like morality, education, and peaceful change. But Hamed Abdel-Samad warns that behind this friendly face, there's a more complicated and dangerous side. Many people in the West see the Brotherhood as moderate and reasonable. They join elections, speak about democracy, and reject clear violence. They wear suits, talk politely about living together, and quote famous thinkers like Rousseau and Locke. This makes Western audiences believe the Brotherhood supports democracy and respect for different views. But Abdel-Samad says this is a carefully planned disguise, a mask to gain trust and power. To the West, they promise peace and tolerance. To their followers, they promise Islamic rule, total control under Sharia law. This double message is no accident. It's a smart strategy. The Brotherhood moves slowly and quietly. Instead of fighting Western power openly, they try to join it through public relations, legal work, and cultural influence. They create research centers and NGOs in Europe and North America, often paid for by rich Gulf countries like Qatar. These groups rarely criticize the Brotherhood or Islamism. Instead, they say that criticizing political Islam is just Islamophobia. Anyone who questions the Brotherhood is called a bigot or imperialist. This clever language protects the Brotherhood and helps it grow quietly. Abdel-Samad is clear. The Brotherhood's peaceful image hides a hard truth. At its core, it wants to control everything: governments, societies, economies, and even private life, all based on strict Islamic law. Even when they play democracy and run for elections, democracy is only a tool to get power. Once they have power, they want to change the state to fit their religious ideas. This happens in many countries: Egypt, Tunisia, Turkey, and others. Good example is Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He came to power talking about reform, democracy, and growth. But once in control, he weakened secular institutions, silenced critics, and filled public life with Islam, changing schools, promoting religious dress, and jailing opponents. Erdogan is not officially part of the Muslim Brotherhood, but Abdel-Samad says they share the same ideas. Erdogan uses democracy to push religious, authoritarian rule. In Tunisia, the Ennahda party did something similar, promising reform but quietly pushing religion. The Brotherhood often blames others when things go wrong. They say the West, Zionists, secularists, or atheists are behind their problems. This story does two things. One, it avoids blaming themselves. Two, it unites their followers against a common enemy. Whether it's corruption in Turkey, election losses in Egypt, or economic troubles, the Brotherhood points fingers outside. This is like old fascist tactics, blaming enemies to tighten control at home. The Brotherhood's five-point creed: Allah is our goal, the Quran is our constitution, the Prophet is our leader, jihad is our path, death in the service of Allah is our highest aspiration. This shows their strict authoritarian mindset. For Abdel-Samad, it's not just words. It's a political plan that rejects democracy, diversity, and secular government. Even if they say they reject violence, this motto shows their true direction. Abdel-Samad thinks the Brotherhood is more than religious. It's an ideology. Its style and goals are like early 20th century European fascism. A strong leader as a moral guide, youth groups trained to obey, glorifying martyrdom and sacrifice, hating liberalism and modern life. The Brotherhood denies being fascist, but their actions, like during Mohamed Morsi's time as Egypt's president, show clear signs of authoritarianism hiding behind democracy. Democracy as a tool, not a goal. After the Arab Spring, the Brotherhood won elections in Egypt. Many hoped they had changed, but soon they started controlling power, weakening courts, and changing the constitution for themselves. People got angry and protested. The military removed Morsi. After losing power, the Brotherhood went back to old tactics, violence, and victim stories. Abdel-Samad describes this as a cycle. 1. Win elections. 2. Undermine democracy once in power. 3. Claim oppression when removed. 4. Go underground and try again. The Muslim Brotherhood is like a political chameleon, flexible, careful, and focused on a long-term goal of Islamic rule. Their real danger is not open war, but slow and steady takeover. To fight this, we must look past simple labels like moderate or extreme. We need to see the Brotherhood for what it really is. A strict, ambitious ideology, hidden behind a polite mask, but as controlling as any dictatorship in history. Every year, millions of Muslims celebrate Eid al-Adha, a holiday based on the story of Abraham and his son. It's a story about faith, sacrifice, and following God's command. Abraham dreams that God orders him to sacrifice his beloved son. Without hesitation, Abraham gets ready to obey. But just before he acts, God stops him and praises his obedience. This story is one of the most respected in Islam, a powerful example of devotion and trust in God. But Hamed Abdel-Samad asks us to think deeper. What kind of belief system asks a parent to kill their own child to prove loyalty? The logic of total obedience. Looking at Abraham's story from a political and psychological view, it's not just about faith. It becomes a lesson in complete obedience, a model for authoritarian thinking. Abraham doesn't question the order. He doesn't hesitate or look for other options. He doesn't even talk to the child's mother. He just obeys. Because asking questions means doubt, and doubt means disobedience. Abdel-Samad says this way of thinking, where obedience is the highest good and moral judgment is given up, is very close to fascism. In fascist systems, surrendering to authority replaces personal conscience. Resisting is betrayal. Independent thinking is treason. So, Abraham's story changes from a religious tale to an ideological blueprint. Obedience without question. In Nazi Germany, Joseph Goebbels once asked crowds, "Do you want total war?" They shouted back, "Yes." They thought they had a choice, but the decision was already made. Abdel-Samad says this shows how authoritarian rule creates the illusion of freedom. The story of Abraham works the same way. The son agrees to be sacrificed, but can a child really consent to death? Did he have a real choice, or was obedience assumed from the start? Fascist regimes do the same thing, disguising forced loyalty as love and calling resistance betrayal. Abdel-Samad goes further. He says rigid monotheistic religions often share the shape of authoritarian control. There is one God, one truth, one path. Dissent is heresy. Doubt is rebellion. In pluralistic religions, diversity is normal. Many gods, many roles. But strict monotheism demands total submission to one will. Islam means surrender. For most Muslims, that means personal devotion. But for Islamists, the political thinkers, surrender is total. It means social, legal, and political submission too. Abdel-Samad warns, the jump from religious obedience to political authoritarianism is dangerously short. Sacrifice as a moral ideal. Both fascism and Islamism glorify sacrifice. Dying for the cause is not just accepted, it's celebrated. Suicide bombers become martyrs. Fighters are promised paradise. Propaganda praises death over life. In Nazi Germany, boys were taught to die for the Führer. In radical Islamist groups, children are trained to seek martyrdom. Both say the same thing. The greatest act is not living well, but dying obediently. The heart of authoritarianism. What makes this mindset so strong and so hard to break is that it becomes internal. People don't obey just because they fear punishment. They believe obedience is right. They feel guilty for questioning authority. Giving up freedom becomes a source of pride because they are told it's noble and good. Abdel-Samad says this is the psychological core of both fascism and Islamism, a deep need to surrender, to belong, to follow clear rules. In return, these systems offer certainty. No confusion, no gray areas, just good versus evil, believers versus unbelievers, us versus them. But this certainty comes at a terrible cost: freedom. Chapter 3 reminds us that authoritarianism doesn't always come with boots and guns. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in sacred stories, dressed in moral language, and given a comforting purpose. When we are told to obey without question, to sacrifice without thinking, we're no longer being asked for faith. We're being trained to surrender. If we don't look at these stories clearly and critically, we risk passing down obedience, not as faith, but as ideological submission. Hamed Abdel-Samad begins with a strange image: two hospital patients who argue all the time but can't live without each other. He says this reflects the deep, twisted relationship between Muslims and Jews, full of anger but also shared history. Today, hatred of Jews in the Arab world is often blamed on the conflict over Israel. But Abdel-Samad says something more dangerous is happening. Many Muslims now believe in conspiracy theories taken straight from Nazi propaganda, like Mein Kampf and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. These books, banned in much of the world, were bestsellers in the Arab world. Abdel-Samad asks a hard question: is this hatred something new, or is it something that's been inside Muslim culture for a long time? Historically, Jews and Muslims lived together, sometimes even peacefully. Unlike Christians, Muslims didn't accuse Jews of killing God. They had no religious reason to hate them. But something changed. According to Abdel-Samad, deep hatred began after the fall of the Islamic Caliphate. When Muslims were strong, they accepted Jews. But when they felt weak, Jews became the target. So the problem, he says, is not with Jews, it's with Muslims' own insecurity. It's a family fight over who has the right to claim religious truth. Things began to change in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. At first, Muhammad tried to make peace with Jewish tribes, but when they rejected his message, he turned against them. Abdel-Samad says Muhammad became a bitter enemy of Judaism. He ordered attacks on Jewish tribes, killing or driving them out. And this wasn't just about war. It became a prophecy, a belief that Muslims must fight Jews until the end of time. A famous hadith even says, "The hour will not come until you fight the Jews. Kill him." Radical Islamists still believe this. They see the war against Jews as holy and never-ending. It's a message that echoes the ideology of Hitler, where Jews are seen not as people, but as enemies of God. No mercy, no sympathy, only extermination. Many people speak of Andalusia, Muslim Spain, as a golden age of tolerance, but Abdel-Samad says that's a myth. Yes, it was a time of science, poetry, and culture, but tolerance existed only when Islamic law was relaxed. Later, when stricter Islamic rulers came to power, like the Almohads, things changed. Jews were forced to convert, pay special taxes, or face death. In 1066 in Granada, a mob killed 4,000 Jews, including the Jewish vizier. Abdel-Samad's point is clear. Tolerance wasn't the rule, it was the exception, and it disappeared when religious control grew stronger. In the 20th century, two powerful movements rose side by side. Zionism, the Jewish return to a homeland; Arab nationalism, a dream of Arab pride and power. When Israel was created and Arab armies were defeated, it created a deep wound in Muslim pride. How could Jews, once treated as second-class citizens, defeat Muslim countries? Abdel-Samad asks, how did Jews build a democratic, advanced society while Arabs stayed stuck in myths and dictatorships? He believes Arab leaders used Israel as an excuse. By blaming everything on Jews, they avoided responsibility and used hatred to control their people. The Nazi influence in the Arab world. After World War II, something terrifying happened. Nazi hatred of Jews was brought into the Arab world. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini, worked with Hitler. He supported the Holocaust and spread Nazi-style messages over Arab radio. Hassan al-Banna, founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, translated parts of Mein Kampf into Arabic. He called Hitler a new messiah and called for a final war against the Jews. This wasn't just political, it was ideological hatred, imported from Europe and absorbed into Islamic discourse. Sayyid Qutb, one of the most influential Islamist thinkers, added fuel to the fire. He wrote a book called Our Struggle Against the Jews. In it, he claimed Jews were eternally treacherous, the same enemies Muhammad faced. He even said, Allah sent Hitler to punish them. This hatred didn't stop with Jews. It extended to Christians as well. Abdel-Samad points to the persecution of Coptic Christians in Egypt, the destruction of churches in Iraq, and the beheadings of 21 Egyptian Christians by ISIS in Libya. He says, wherever people are killed for their beliefs, that is fascism. Abdel-Samad ends this chapter with a warning. He says many Muslims read Mein Kampf, but not Voltaire or other Enlightenment thinkers. This, he says, is a cultural decay, a sickness that comes from refusing to think critically. By blaming Jews and Christians, Muslim societies avoid asking hard questions. They hold on to religious and tribal identities while driving out diversity. As a result, Christians are fleeing the Arab world, and the dictators remain in power. He writes that this system builds walls that protect dictators, walls that keep people locked inside, walls that turn society into a perfect prison. Hamed Abdel-Samad doesn't say this to insult. He says it because he wants change. Hatred of Jews and Christians isn't just unfair, it's dangerous. It keeps Muslim societies weak, divided, and closed off from the world. Until Muslims confront these hard truths, he says, the cycle of hate will continue, and freedom will remain out of reach. There was a time when the Islamic world led in science, philosophy, and culture. This wasn't just because of religion. It was because early Islam embraced outside influence. Arab leaders borrowed from Persian administration, Byzantine military, and Greek philosophy. Cities like Baghdad became centers of knowledge. As long as Islamic law wasn't strictly enforced, freedom of thought thrived. Hamed Abdel-Samad calls this period a golden age. But it didn't last. When external threats rose and internal fears grew, Islam shifted. It turned inward. Dissent was crushed. Non-Muslim ideas were rejected. Tolerance, once the engine of success, became a threat to power. Today, many Muslims celebrate that era, but forget why it happened. Instead of recognizing openness, they insist Islam alone brought civilization. They ignore history to protect pride. Abdel-Samad points out something uncomfortable. The greatest thinkers of the Islamic Golden Age, they weren't Arabs, and many wouldn't even be accepted as true Muslims today. Avicenna, Al-Farabi, Maimonides, philosophers, scientists, theologians, their roots were Persian, Jewish, or Hellenistic. Their ideas shaped both Islamic and European thought. Back then, Islamic rulers were secure enough to engage outsiders. They supported Ilm al-Kalam, the science of discourse, where reason and faith could coexist. But as invasions and crusades loomed, that confidence disappeared. Critics were silenced. Philosophy was branded dangerous. Literalism, rigid, unquestioning obedience to the Quran, became law. Criticizing the Prophet, a death sentence. Questioning scripture, heresy, deviation, treason. Islamic thought stopped evolving, and the consequences were deep. In 1258, Mongols destroyed Baghdad. Libraries burned, scholars were killed. Instead of rebuilding intellectually, Muslim scholars blamed the loss on moral weakness, not on military defeat. They doubled down on scripture. Fiqh, legal interpretation, became marifa, mystical submission to God's will. Science, forbidden. Philosophy, corrupting. Minorities and women, silenced or pushed aside. Then came one of the greatest lost chances in history, the printing press. Europe embraced it. Knowledge exploded. The Enlightenment followed. But in the Islamic world, it was banned for 300 years. Why? Clerics feared Quranic corruption and the loss of control. While Europe progressed, the Islamic world sank into superstition. Literalism replaced curiosity, faith replaced reason, and power replaced thought. Into this vacuum stepped Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, an 18th century preacher who promised renewal, but meant regression. He didn't seek reform, he wanted a return to the 7th century, where unbelievers were enemies and holy war was a duty. His alliance with the Saudi royal family gave birth to Wahhabism, a system that now shapes Saudi Arabia's laws, schools, and global influence. Abdel-Samad exposes what this ideology really teaches. First graders hear, every religion is false, except Islam. 8th graders read, Jews are monkeys, Christians are pigs. 12th graders are taught, jihad means fighting disbelief and injustice. Yet this same regime commits oppression at home, while exporting these teachings to mosques in 19 European countries. It's what Abdel-Samad calls modern fascism with a sacred mask, a system where people are oppressed but think they're free. Arab dictators and religious leaders have long built walls to keep out freedom, walls to stop questions, walls to control thought. They refuse to mention the Mongol invasions in textbooks because the Mongols converted to Islam, but they never stopped talking about the Crusades or colonialism. The message, the West is always the enemy, Islam is always the victim. But now, something is breaking through, the internet. It's a new printing press, a second enlightenment. Young Muslims are online. They're reading, watching, asking, challenging. One youth even asked a preacher, "You say God will fix the economy, but what's your actual plan?" This moment, small as it seems, matters. It shows that faith is no longer enough. Reality demands answers. Abdel-Samad says we are seeing a cultural divide grow between those trapped in the 7th century and those hungry for the 21st. Yes, extremists also use the internet, but for the first time in centuries, many Muslims are asking, what if everything we were told was wrong? Islam once stood for exploration, openness, and inquiry. Today, in much of the Muslim world, it stands for control, fear, and rigidity. Abdel-Samad isn't mourning the past, he's warning about the future. The refusal to evolve, the rejection of progress, the persecution of thought. This is not holiness, it is decline. And unless Muslims confront this, the light of knowledge will continue to fade, while dictators and fanatics guard the darkness. But with the internet, with new generations asking bold questions, there may still be hope, a spark of renewal that comes not from returning to the past, but by finally embracing the future. When the Twin Towers fell, the whole world watched in shock. But across much of the Islamic world, the reaction was not unity, it was confusion. Some condemned the attacks, others quietly celebrated them. Many didn't know what to think. Conspiracy theories filled the vacuum. Claims that Mossad or the CIA were behind it spread like wildfire, especially the lie that 4,000 Jews stayed home that day. A baseless myth still repeated in Arab media today. The irony, as Abdel-Samad points out, is almost surreal. At once, the attacks were blamed on Israel and praised as divine punishment for America. The logic collapsed, but the emotional payoff stuck. Political scientist Francis Fukuyama asked the hard question, what exactly did Osama bin Laden do for the Islamic world, except destroy 2 buildings? Abdel-Samad answers, bin Laden, like many Islamist leaders, offered bitterness instead of solutions. He redirected anger outward toward imaginary enemies. Why fix poverty or corruption at home when you can celebrate the humiliation of a foreign superpower? It's easier to cheer the collapse of a skyscraper than care for a starving child. The 9/11 hijackers were not uneducated or poor. They studied in the West. They had tasted freedom. But instead of embracing it, they recoiled. They felt shame, temptation, and guilt. They turned back not just to faith, but to fanaticism. They didn't hate America because it oppressed them. They hated it because it seduced them. Abdel-Samad describes them as infected by a virus, the virus of jihad. And the infection didn't begin with them. It began with Muhammad, he argues, a prophet who didn't just preach, but waged war. The idea of jihad, not as spiritual struggle but as armed conquest, is not a modern distortion. It's embedded in Islamic scripture. Abdel-Samad dismisses the division between greater and lesser jihad as a distraction. The problem, he says, is not in the interpretation of jihad. Jihad itself is the problem. A doctrine built on dividing the world into believers and enemies. Why would someone kill themselves and thousands of others for an idea? The answer lies partly in a promise: paradise. In Surah 9, the Quran offers a reward to those who kill and are killed for Allah, a heavenly realm filled with rivers of wine, endless youth, and virgins. Abdel-Samad calls this not a paradise but a pornopia, a fantasy realm built for frustrated men. Hadiths describe 72 virgins per martyr, women whose virginity renews endlessly, and men with eternal erections. This is not divine union. It's a heavenly brothel, and it didn't come from nowhere. After the death of Khadija, Muhammad's first wife, the Prophet married 11 more women. One was Aisha, aged 9. After slaughtering the Jewish Banu Qurayza tribe, he claimed Safiya, whose father, husband, and brothers had just been executed, as his own. In the Quran, paradise isn't just a reward, it's a contract. Abdel-Samad calls this sexual jihad, the weaponization of rape to dominate and humiliate. It's not ancient history. ISIS repeated it with Yazidi women. It's a continuing legacy, one sanctified by scripture and justified by belief. Islam's view of women, Abdel-Samad says, is riddled with contradictions. The Prophet gave women some rights, but he also called them deficient in intelligence, the greatest fitna, temptation, for men, and claimed that most inhabitants of hell would be women. From this fear and desire to control comes a system of deep, violent inequality. Islam didn't create the idea of valuing virginity, but it made it a rule. It took ideas from Jewish traditions and made the fear of women's sexuality stronger. The hijab, according to Abdel-Samad, isn't just about modesty, it's a symbol of not trusting women, but it turned it into law. If a wife is unveiled, how can her husband be sure his children are truly his? Virginity isn't about morality, it's about control. In Iran's penal code, a man's left testicle is worth more than a woman's entire life. 100 camels versus 50. The dia, blood money system, places a woman's value at half a man's. The mahr, dowry, turns female sexuality into a market commodity with higher prices for untouched girls. And while men enjoy the loophole of temporary marriage, allowing daily, serial, halal sex, women face stoning, acid attacks, genital mutilation, and honor killings for stepping outside the lines. This isn't faith. It's fascism draped in piety. A society governed by paranoia, always fearing female betrayal and male weakness. The broken body and the double life. Across the Islamic world, women live a double life. In public, veiled and silent. In secret, seeking hymen reconstruction surgeries to restore a symbol of purity that has nothing to do with who they are. At the same time, public spaces are filled with sexual harassment. Men raised to repress desire and then given no healthy outlet, lash out, punish, and grope in crowds. And amid this, Sunni scholars endorse sexual jihad. Young Muslim girls, some still teenagers, are told they can marry fighters for one night to support the cause in Syria. It's all permitted, they say. The Prophet allowed it. It's no longer just about paradise after death. Paradise begins on the battlefield, in the bodies of captured or brainwashed women. In the Islamic imagination, paradise was supposed to offer peace. But Abdel-Samad argues it offers a mirror, reflecting earthly frustration, male domination, and fear of women. The result is a culture torn in two, where virginity is demanded but never respected, where women are idolized as pure but punished for being human, where young men are told to resist desire until they can weaponize it. Behind all of it is a terrifying contradiction, a religion that both fears and obsesses over sex, a society that hides women and still blames them for everything. This is not just a moral failing, it's a ticking time bomb where shame, repression, and sacred promises collide. And unless this inner war is faced, not with slogans but with honesty, no outer enemy will ever be the real threat.